The room smelled of fresh leather and cold ambition. Fluorescent lights hummed above a long glass table, somewhere on the upper floors of a corporate tower in the heart of São Paulo, the year 1989. Outside, the city roared its usual roar. Horns, diesel fumes, the relentless percussion of 10 million lives pressing forward. But inside that office, for one suspended, airless moment, everything went completely still. A man in a tailored Italian suit had just looked across the table at Ayrton Senna, three-time world champion in the making, the fastest human being on four wheels, the man who read his Bible before every race, and shouted those four words as if he were daring God himself to respond. God does not exist. The words hung in the air like exhaust smoke on a windless day. The assistants frozen, the pens motionless, and Ayrton Senna, calm as a cathedral, simply looked at the man, let the silence stretch to its absolute limit, and then said the one thing no one in that room expected. If you want to know what he said, stay with us. And if stories like this move something in you, consider subscribing to this channel because we tell the ones that never made the front page. Ayrton Senna da Silva was born on the 21st of March, 1960, in the Santana neighborhood of São Paulo, Brazil, a city that was already bursting at its seams with contradiction. His father, Milton Guirado Theodoro da Silva, was a prosperous landowner and industrialist. His mother, Nede Senna da Silva, was a quiet woman of deep Catholic faith who prayed the rosary every evening. Ayrton grew up in wealth, yes, but also in the warmth of a household where grace was said before meals, where the Bible sat open on the coffee table beside the television, where faith was not a performance, but a practice as natural as breathing. From his earliest years, Ayrton understood something that many people spend entire lifetimes trying to learn: that the most powerful force in any room is not the loudest voice. It is the most certain soul. He began karting at the age of 4, guided by his father's hand on the steering wheel of a small homemade kart with a 1-horsepower engine. By the time he was 13, he was competing and winning. By his early 20s, he had left Brazil for England, trading the eternal summer heat of São Paulo for the gray, wet lanes of Norfolk, sleeping in a modest flat, living on the edge of financial survival, driven by something that could not be measured in horsepower or lap times. He called it a calling, something placed inside him by something greater than himself. In the early years, when money was scarce and doubt was plentiful, Senna would sit alone at the small kitchen table of his rented house in Norfolk and read his Bible. Not for show. Not because someone was watching. Because it was where he found the signal through all the noise. By 1984, he had made his Formula One debut for Toleman, a small, underfunded team that no one expected to challenge the giants. In Monaco that year, racing in torrential rain, he drove a car that should not have been on the same circuit as the McLarens and Ferraris, and he was closing on the leader, Alain Prost, at a rate of nearly 4 seconds per lap when the race was controversially stopped. Many who watched that day said the rain had made him invisible, that the spray around his car seemed to part like curtains. Senna himself said simply that he trusted what he could not see. And in Formula One, were fractions of a second separate triumph from catastrophe. That kind of trust is either madness or grace. By 1988, he had moved to McLaren Honda, the most dominant car and team combination the sport had ever seen. That season, Senna and his teammate Alain Prost won 15 of 16 Grands Prix. 15 of 16. Numbers so extraordinary, they still feel fictional when you read them. Senna took his first world championship by 3 points. He celebrated not with champagne, or at least not only with champagne, but with prayer, kneeling, in a garage that smelled of burned rubber and high-octane fuel, and the particular metallic sweetness of a winning engine cooling down in the Brazilian night. He pointed to the sky and whispered words that no microphone caught. But success in Formula One in the late 1980s was never only about driving. It was a commercial machine, a political theater. The sport was flooded with corporate money. Cigarette companies, electronics brands, automobile manufacturers, and the drivers who sat inside those cars were, in the language of the boardrooms, brand assets. They were photographed, marketed, packaged, and sold. And Senna, with his angular jaw, his dark eyes that seemed to hold an entire country's grief and pride behind them, his precise and formal English, and his quietly explosive Portuguese, Senna was the most valuable brand asset in the sport, which meant that the men in the tailored suits wanted access to him, wanted his presence in their conference rooms, his handshake in their promotional materials, his face aligned with their products. Senna tolerated much of this. He understood the commercial reality of his world. He had been advised, managed, and handled by professionals. He attended sponsor meetings and promotional events with the same focused intensity he brought to qualifying sessions. He shook hands with men he did not particularly like. He smiled for cameras in situations that did not call for smiling. He was, in every professional sense, a team player in the great commercial engine of Formula One. But he had limits, and his limits were the things that touched the center of who he was: his country, his family, his faith. The meeting was scheduled through McLaren's commercial department, as so many of those meetings were. A significant sponsor, a powerful businessman who had made his fortune in finance and manufacturing and who had grown accustomed to the particular luxury that vast wealth provides, which is the luxury of never being told no, had requested a private meeting with Senna to discuss a potential long-term personal endorsement deal. The numbers were substantial, the kind of numbers that made even the most serious men pause. The meeting was held in a private conference room arranged through a business intermediary in São Paulo. Several McLaren representatives were present. Several assistants were present. Everyone in the room understood the weight of what was being proposed. The businessman spoke with the authority of someone who had never been denied access to anything. He described the campaign, the reach, the revenue, the visibility it would give Senna beyond the racetrack. He spoke for a long time. He used the language of investment and return, of market penetration and demographic alignment. And then, as if to compliment Senna, he said something intended as praise, but delivered as provocation. He said that Senna's public religiosity, his habit of pointing to the sky after victories, his mentions of God in press conferences, his well-known Bible reading, was, in his words, charming theater. Good for the fans, he implied. Marketable. But surely, the man continued, leaning forward across the glass table with the confidence of someone who expects agreement. Surely a man as intelligent and rational as Ayrton Senna did not actually believe all of that. Surely he understood that God was a story. A useful story, perhaps, but a story nonetheless. There was a pause, and then the businessman, reading the silence as permission to continue, went further. His voice rising slightly, riding the momentum of his own certainty, he looked at Senna directly and said the words, loud enough that everyone in the room heard them with perfect clarity. Loud enough that the assistants closest to the door later said they felt the air in the room change. God does not exist. 10 seconds of silence followed. Not the uncomfortable silence of a gaffe or a misunderstanding. Something heavier. Something that had weight and temperature. The room felt cold despite the São Paulo heat pressing against the glass. The assistants looked at their notepads. The McLaren representatives looked at each other. Nobody looked at the businessman. Senna had not flinched, had not raised his voice, had not moved forward in his chair, or gripped the edge of the table, or done any of the things that men do when they are trying to assert dominance. He simply sat, perfectly still. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, measured in the way that a very fast car moving at its absolute limit appears, from a distance, to be moving slowly. He said, "Then who have I been speaking to all my life? And who kept me alive at 280 kilometers per hour through the rain at Monaco in '84? And who held Eric Comas when I left my car to help him, and should have been struck by another car, but was not? And who placed in my heart a desire so strong to help the children of Brazil that I gave away $400 million and never told a single journalist? If there is no God, then every extraordinary thing I have lived is merely accident. And I do not believe in accidents. I believe in something much more powerful than this room." He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He nodded to the McLaren representatives. He picked up the small Bible he had placed on the table when he arrived. The same Bible he carried everywhere, the same one his mother had given him, its spine soft from years of opening, and he walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped. Without turning around, he said one more thing, quietly, to no one and everyone. The loudest man in the room is usually the one most afraid of the silence. He left. The businessman did not secure the endorsement deal. He did not speak publicly about the meeting. Several years later, according to people close to him, something in his own life shifted in ways he had not anticipated. A loss, a reckoning, the kind of moment that strips away the tailored suit and leaves only the raw person inside it. Whether he found what he was looking for is not recorded. Some stories do not have tidy endings, but some do have precise pivots. A moment where something turns. This was Senna's, and it was not the first time. In 1988, during qualifying at Monaco, Senna experienced something that he described for the rest of his life as the moment he understood his own relationship with God most clearly. He had been driving faster than the laws of physics seemed to allow. Lap after lap, the times kept dropping, by half a second, then a full second, then nearly 2 seconds faster than his teammate Prost in the identical car. And then, in his own words, he said he suddenly felt himself floating above the cockpit, above the yellow helmet, watching himself drive from outside his own body. He described it not as terror, but as peace, as if the car had stopped being a machine and had become something else entirely. A prayer at 300 kilometers per hour, a conversation with something he could not name but had always known. He came back to himself, slowed down, parked the car, sat in the garage, and did not speak for a long time. That is the part of Ayrton Senna that could not be sold and could not be marketed and could not be placed in a campaign. The part that existed before the helmets and the trophies and the world championships and the contracts. A boy from Sao Paulo who believed, with absolute certainty, that the most extraordinary things in life are not achieved alone. That there is a current running beneath the visible world, and if you learn to quiet yourself enough, you can feel it. You can move with it. And when you move with it at full speed, the world calls it genius. Senna called it grace. He donated, by the time of his death on the 1st of May, 1994, more than $400 million of his personal fortune, in secret, to children living in poverty in Brazil. He had created the framework for what his sister Viviane would transform into the Instituto Ayrton Senna, an organization that has since educated more than 25 million children. He did not do this to be admired. He did not announce it at press conferences. He did not put it in his marketing materials. He did it because something in him had been asked to do it. And he answered. On the morning of his final race, at Imola in Italy, Senna woke early and opened his Bible. His sister Vivian later shared what he read that day, a passage that promised the greatest of all gifts, not victory, not fame, not safety, but God Himself. He drove out onto the Tamburello corner at 211 kilometers per hour. What happened in those final seconds remains technically contested to this day. A piece of suspension, a steering column, the physics of impact. But the inscription on his tombstone, chosen by his family from a verse he had marked in his own Bible, reads in Portuguese, Nada pode me separar do amor de Deus. Nothing can separate me from the love of God. No man in a tailored suit in any conference room anywhere in the world ever came close to separating Ayrton Senna from that certainty. You may have been in a room like that. Not a boardroom, perhaps, but a moment, a conversation, a voice, internal or external, that told you the things you believe in most deeply are naive, impractical, soft. The world is harder than that, the voice said. The world doesn't work that way. Give it up, let it go, be practical. And the question is not whether you will hear that voice. The question is what you will do when you hear it. Whether you will pick up your Bible, your truth, whatever form it takes, and walk quietly toward the door. Whether you will trust what you cannot see with the same certainty that you trust what you can. Whether you are willing to move at full speed toward something larger than yourself, even when every instrument in the car is telling you to slow down. That is the Senna question. And it is your question, too. If this story moved you, leave a comment below with the word faith. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story in this series. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them now. The fastest man who ever lived went slowly enough to kneel.